Hello, and welcome to the podcast, The Other Woman and the Wife, where we discuss why infidelity exists and what we can learn from it. Today, we're going to change things up a bit for you guys. I have decided to ask Anne Marie to go and look for some stories that have been shared publicly without identifying information, because I think it's when we listen to other people's stories we learn the most. Every book is a self-help book because the character can make mistakes and you don't have to make them yourself. So if any of this story is relatable for you guys, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and contact us via the website. There is a lot of links in the show description. But Anne Marie, can you enlighten us on why you selected this story and where you found it?
Yeah, so I found this story on a site called loveshack.org, with the forum and topic being my first affair story. And I chose it because I thought there were a lot of relatable things streaming throughout, that patterns that I've seen now that I've been in the community and actually having this discussion for a while.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and read you guys the story, and then we will go ahead and wax poetic on the things that we found most interesting, since we've now been spending all of this time dialoguing with other people inside of affairs. So here we go. I know that there isn't a one size fits all in terms of cheating, but if you knew me, I'd be one of the least likely people you think would cheat. My parents have been married for 50 years, no infidelity to speak of there. I'm in my early 30s, come from a Catholic background, and am a reserved, introverted type of person. My husband was my first official boyfriend, though I had casually dated previously. My husband is English and I'm American, and we had a long distance relationship for a few years until I could move to the UK. Sure, I had crushes on a couple of male friends during college, but never acted on them out of respect for my relationship. If you told me a few months ago that I would end up cheating, I would have told you you're crazy. We got married in the US in 2016, and I moved to the UK a few months later with my visa in hand. My husband works away from home during the week, and he's home every weekend. This is just our schedule, and we're used to it. Since moving abroad, I've had lots of issues with depression, anxiety, homesickness. There have been plenty of good times too. I don't really have friends here besides my husband's friends, and it's difficult for me to open up to people. I also work from home. There's been plenty of times I've felt my husband hasn't been as understanding, and dare I say, selfish. This has caused issues, and divorce has come up more than once. I felt resentment towards him, and to be completely honest as well, I'm not sure if we've ever really had a strong spark. Sex is not a big part of our lives, and my husband would rather look at porn than have sex. This has left me dissatisfied. At the same time, he's an absolutely wonderful, sweet man in many other aspects. My family adores him. He puts up with things that other men would have just walked away from. He's a provider. He did not deserve this at all. Earlier this year, things were really bad, and I went back to the US for a while to stay with my family. My husband and I weren't officially separated or anything. I just needed space. I came back and we were in a better place. I should also add that for years, I've known that I enjoy getting male attention. And maybe this stems from loneliness. That spark that just wasn't very present in my marriage. Whether it was catching a guy in the gym checking me out or my husband's coworkers subtly flirting with me, I felt desired and I liked it. I know I'm probably not the only taken woman to feel this way. Even so, cheating never crossed my mind. A couple months ago, my husband and I had a bad argument. Frustrated and feeling down in a very random moment of impulsivity, I downloaded Tinder. This was extremely out of character for me. I was curious to see what everyone was talking about and thought there was no harm in just window shopping local guys. My conscience was with me every step of the way, and I knew every step was a step too far. From the initial download to making a profile to chatting with guys, even so, I had no intention of cheating. Soon, I began swiping, and the likes piled up. It was addicting. All these men found me attractive in some way. About a week of playing around on Tinder, I came across James. He was an attractive guy and he seemed very honest in his profile. We matched and he messaged me right away. I was transparent with him and told him I was married, but open to friendship. He was completely understanding and non judgmental, saying, "You do you." James had a blue collar job and a son from a previous relationship. Our chat soon moved to a different messaging source, and we were in contact a lot. We didn't have a ton in common, but he was nice to talk to and was charming. I told him about my marital issues and feelings of isolation. I felt mega butterflies, which I hadn't felt in years. Our chats became flirty, but we both agreed to no contact on weekends when my husband was home. He was respectful of my situation and knew my family life came first. He would say considerate things like, "Hope you guys have a good weekend together." Soon enough, we began sexting and sending pictures. It turned me on, even though I knew I shouldn't have been doing it. I justified it by reminding myself that nothing physical had happened, and therefore, in my mind, there was no cheating. However, we then started talking about officially meeting each other. There was a lot of sexual tension, and we hadn't even met yet. At the same time, he didn't put pressure on the first meeting. He said that sex wouldn't have to happen. He'd just be happy to meet up and chat. The day before we were supposed to meet, he seemed aloof and hesitant. Maybe he had cold feet. At that point, I was doubtful we'd meet up at all, so I thought I'd just let it go. Surprisingly, the next day at almost midnight, he asked if I was still up for meeting that night. He worked long shifts until late, so the only time we could meet was after midnight. He also lived 45 minutes away. I wouldn't dare meet up at my own house. Not an ideal situation. I was in my pajamas and ready for bed when I got his message, and I initially told him we could meet another time. He sounded a little disappointed. Then, in a moment of complete spontaneity, I changed my mind and said I could meet up. So I got ready. And 50 minutes later, I was out the door. Yup, off to meet a guy from Tinder at 1 a.m. while married. Completely normal. I wasn't nervous on the drive there. Rather, I felt excited. I was curious to meet the man I'd been chatting to. At the same time, I knew what I was doing was completely nuts and wrong. I pulled up to his apartment, and there he was. He was slimmer than I expected, though very in shape. He had stubble and tattoos. He was a bit rough around the edges, quite different from my straight laced husband. He was good looking, though. I was slightly more attracted to him in his pictures than I was in person. Of course, that attraction grew after we had sex. I was so nervous, but we spent a good amount of time just talking. I could tell he was trying to put me at ease. We were flirting, and I could feel the chemistry. One thing led to another, and we started kissing, though in my head, the entire time, I knew I shouldn't have been doing it. Kissing led to sex. I'm still shocked at how quickly and easily it happened. I stayed there until early morning. On the drive home, my head was filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, I felt extreme guilt. On the other hand, I felt excited and happy. Days afterwards, the excited feeling overpowered the guilt. As horrible as that is, I felt confident and frankly, like a fucking badass. I think I felt more guilt before the infidelity actually happened. When the chatting became intense and we discussed meeting in person, I thought to myself, what would happen if I actually cheated? I couldn't do it. I even brought myself to tears thinking of my poor husband then. Even on the first drive to his place, I thought more than once, it's not too late to just say no. Of course, I didn't heed my own advice. We stayed in contact, and each message I got from him felt like a high. We met up 3 more times, and the sex was amazing. We're talking multiple positions, rough, all night. It felt so natural. I'd never experienced that before and felt like it was my big sexual awakening. We also took breaks for cuddling and talking. I stayed overnight and left in the early morning. We got along as friends, but also had an intense sexual chemistry. He told me how gorgeous I was, how good in bed I was, how he couldn't wait to see me again. He filled the emptiness that I had inside of me. He said he felt okay with being the other man and told me one of his married friends has an on off again affair for years. The last time we met, we kissed goodbye and everything seemed fine. We both agreed to meet up again in a couple of days. Earlier that night, I asked if he still wanted to continue seeing each other. He said, yeah, with a duh, of course tone. I texted him when I got home and he didn't reply, which was a bit unusual. The day we were supposed to meet, I messaged him and we exchanged a few audio messages. He sounded fine, but at the same time, I was getting slightly off vibes from him. Call it a woman's intuition. He didn't reply to my last audio message, and I heard nothing more from him that day about meeting up. After that, it was obvious something was up, so I didn't press it any further. That was the last time I heard from him. It's been 2 weeks. I would feel better if I had some closure from it or a reason why our communication suddenly dropped. Did he feel too weird about being with a married woman? Did he only see me as a conquest and moved on? Who knows? We were in contact for 7 weeks and we met up 4 times. It was short lived, but it really affected me. I feel used and like I meant nothing. Looking back, even in the short time I knew him, he had some narcissistic tendencies, which I should have taken as a red flag. Hell, I should have taken being unfaithful as a major red flag. I can hide some of my feelings, but I've had to suffer in silence from this. And it 100% serves me right for cheating. My husband has no idea, and I will never tell him. I can't erase what I did. I'm trying to just forget about it and put it behind me. The worst part, though, is that I have an itch now, and I'm tempted to do it again. I'm struggling, guys. Woo! Oh, that's the end of that story. That's a hell of a story.
Mhm.
What do you think some of the most interesting parts of that story were?
I know one of the biggest things I noticed was the author's ability to like state certain things that were wrong and like off kilter in her marriage, but then always going back and being like, oh, but he's adored by my family and like he doesn't deserve any of this. And he's a good guy. For every like reason she would give that was like, hey, let's dig into that. She would then ignore her intuition on it.
And all of the reasons that like she was using to convince herself that the disconnect inside of her marriage wasn't real was external perceptions. He's a good guy. My family adores him. Like all of these other reasons that's like, okay, but do you know how you feel inside of this relationship? Do you know why you feel disconnected inside of this relationship? And I think that the person who wrote this story, she talks a lot about how she had a major adjustment before this experience of her affair. And I'm finding that, like, definitely there is something traumatic that occurs among individuals who make the choice to cheat within, I'll say, like the 5 years. I think that unmet trauma breeds trauma type thing. And even moving to another country, like they say, one of the most traumatic things a human can endure is actually moving locations. And as someone who has
Mhm.
just moved locations, like I cannot emphasize that enough. It is, you have to rebuild from scratch. And the adaptability piece of humans is something that you have to refine and build, I think, while you're in the experience. And I think that she probably had her sights set a little bit high. I'm sure she had this very romantic vision of like, I'm going to get married to this British man and I'm going to move away from America. And I have this visa. Like she talks about having the visa and she's ready to go. And I'm just like, oh, what were your expectations of marriage? Like, what were your expectations of moving to another country? Because I think ultimately, when you're that low, you've kind of let disappointment create your reality. And then everywhere you turn, you find validating evidence of my life is disappointing. My experience is disappointing. I'm disconnected. And
Yeah.
what does she reach for? Her phone. Like,
Yeah.
I will never forget when I realized how toxic the relationship I had with my phone was and how much power I gave this digital device that, was created to expedite communication. Yet I'd be, letting it take away my sleep, letting it take away my peace, like all of these things. So I think it's
Mhm.
really interesting.
And she also addresses the fact that she mentions that it was a long distance relationship for a long time. So easy to build up an expectation around how everything will be better and different once you're actually together. And
Oh, yeah.
then I can relate to that then when you are finally together, but you've now dropped yourself out of your comfort zone in every way. It's
Oh, yes.
it's traumatizing.
Yeah, it is. And people are like, what are you talking about? It's just a move. I'm like, it's like your location kind of helps, I'll say, evolve your identity. And
Mhm.
if you're, if you're thinking that you're going to be something different than you are just by moving locations, it doesn't work like that. I love telling people wherever you go, there you are, because that was the statement that came flooding through my mind when I made the jump from California to Nevada. And we were walking through the house and that we had just purchased. And I was like, I still feel like shit inside. And I've gotten everything I want. So, like, what is up with my wants? Like, why do I want
Yeah.
these things? And why don't they fulfill me? Like, why am I still
Mhm.
not happy?
Changed my last name, I changed states, I did all of these things that were on the outside, like, I had cut ties entirely
Yeah.
in my
And
situation.
she also makes note of like the monotony that she encountered in her marriage. This is just our schedule and we're used to it. So when I think of this woman that's writing it, I'm like, okay, so you're an American who has landed in a totally new country. You are probably not a community builder, and you're kind of allowing your husband to build the community you exist in, but you're feeling disconnected from your spouse because he can't relate to your struggles. And I just think that like her expectations of her spouse aren't really grounded in what a spouse can provide an individual. Like she really needs to be looking to herself to build herself up and move herself in a direction of her choosing. What about the sex, dude? Sex isn't a big part of our lives, and my husband would rather look at porn than have sex. Oh, oh,
And then so this has left me dissatisfied. For obvious reasons, I can see how that would happen. And yet,
yeah.
she still seems almost puzzled when she's like, "I did notice a few years ago that I do really like male attention." The fact that there's this correlation that the writer can't see, even when
Mhm.
writing it down, even when, like, rereading what they wrote down, they still can't see this correlation that just seems so obvious as an outsider reading it.
Yeah. And also, on the attention thing, like, who fucking doesn't like to get attention for who they are? You know? I feel like that's
Yeah.
been a huge thing where people start to berate themselves because they enjoy receiving attention. And I'm like, you really don't have to shame the shit out of yourself for like enjoying attention from other people. Like, that's not it. It's okay that you have a desire to have somebody else see you, pretty much.
Yeah. But as a married person, you're not supposed to actually say that part
Ugh.
out loud because you're supposed to be
According to all
remaining.
the unhappily married people in the world, I think, you know?
Yeah. Because, like you said, it's a natural. But also, if you're trying to reason out that sex isn't that important in a marriage that's going to last forever, then I can see
Oh,
how
yeah.
you're a little shocked when you actually do like male attention because to just to convince yourself of that alone, which people do all the time. The marriage is so good except the sex, or like they people say it in conversation all the time. It's like a running joke in rom-coms.
But also, I feel like there are those married couples that end up staying together in a toxic, dysfunctional dynamic because the sex is good. Sex isn't the entirety of the relationship for sure, but it's really interesting how, I mean, if she knows that her husband would rather look at porn than have sex, and she's more of the type of person who would rather have sex than look at porn, then there's likely an incompatibility piece to this relationship that they're not giving attention to. And they probably would benefit from speaking openly about it, but that's not, it doesn't sound like communication is hopping in this household.
No, no, shocker on that one. Something else I found really funny was just the way that she talks about, in a very random moment of impulsivity, I downloaded Tinder. And there's another time where she's talking about leaving and she's like, 50 minutes and I was out the door. It was so uncharacteristic of me. And I feel like the more stories that you look into and the more conversation you have around this topic, that is such a common thread. It's this, I didn't even know who I was. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know I was capable of doing these things. You still keep doing it because something is still calling you in that direction of intrigue, of who is this new spontaneous person?
Yeah. And I feel like whenever people are like, this was extremely out of character for me, I just think like, you're not a fucking character, dude. You're like a live, living human being. So I think that doing something that you haven't done before and then immediately deflecting to, oh, this really isn't me. I'm like, do you know how to accept yourself? Do you know how to like really evaluate your behavior and your thoughts and your feelings and kind of be at peace with like the fact that you do go outside the lines, you do blur the lines. And if you're not allowing yourself the space to see that, like I remember the one time that I realized that I was capable of anything that another human was. And that being a really humbling moment for me because it was like, who am I to deem that I would never or I will always? Those are such absolute statements. Like basically it came up that would I ever kill someone in defense of protecting my own child's life? And I was like, oh, I could never. And I was like, you're such a liar. You don't know what you would do. You have no idea. And I think it's the not knowing and embracing it. And embracing the I don't knows, like this woman, it seems like she really doesn't have a sound understanding of what she needs in order to feel fulfilled in the world. And so when you're saying things like, this was extremely out of character for me, I think it's that whole punishment of, you know, it is the self sabotage. It's the wanting to berate yourself.
And I think Glennon touches on this in her book Untamed really well, where she talks about how she was writing her memoirs, like she was writing out her character essentially. She was writing out her future and she was writing out how she was going to fix everything. And then she was going ahead and she was doing it. And I
Yeah.
think that we do that all the time. It really resonated with me when she talked about doing that in that book because I was like, oh, I might be a planner and that planning might become toxic if it's always for this future point.
If it's
And
super rigid, right? Like that's what I think the fantasy is in. The fantasy is when we start to romanticize an experience we haven't had yet. And
yeah.
nobody is aware of it except for our brains.
And I remember in my situation, I was very much in the I don't know who this person is who could do this. And I'm going to leave. For me, it was another moving situation. So I'm going to leave that version of me behind. There's like, I didn't like
They
any of
come
that.
with
Like,
you.
exactly. I basically had to take those newfound parts of myself and I compartmentalize them as being negatives. And now
Mm.
that I'm coming out the other side, that spontaneity, all of these things that I had labeled, that was bad, that was irresponsible. I don't want anything to do with those parts. Now that I'm actually stepping away from all of it and just trying to figure out who I am, there's some of my favorite parts. And I am finally getting
I
to
get that.
rediscover it. Like I'm rediscovering, ooh, I listened to that song Risk. And because my situation right now is very much, I'm just going out on my own. I feel like the risk is that I'm taking is like myself. And I
Uh-huh.
feel so free to just let all of those parts that I tried to write off and pretend that they didn't exist, let them just be healthily
Or even hate
existing.
them, you know? When I think about you and a lot of other women, they immediately want to hate themselves for enjoying an experience, an affair, or good sex. We don't even have to call it an affair, you know? Like they hate themselves for enjoying the good sex. They hate themselves for even struggling with the guilt. And I'm like, what if that's like kind of the point? What if it's the grapple effect where you're really looking at a version of yourself and saying, why do you do that? Why do
Mm-hmm.
you do that? And why am I so inclined to hate you for it? You know?
Even this woman here, she writes, I can hide some of my feelings, but I've had to suffer in silence from this. And that 100% serves me right for cheating. This mentality that we can then serve like, oh, the unhappiness that I feel that serves me right. I just have to do
Right.
my time. It's like this mentality that there's this time to be served for your actions and your
Yeah.
indulgences. And I just think that that is such a common thing. And the reality is that's not even how it works.
There's this desire for justice that exists deep within us, I think. And we think by hating ourselves, we will be able to serve justice to ourselves. And that is not at all how it works. If anything, that just keeps you in a place where, I mean, she even says, you know, the worst part though is that I have an itch now and I'm tempted to do it again. I think that not understanding why she was led to a place of making the choice to cheat will perpetuate her looking to meet her needs and deceiving other people about what role she plays in their life. And the husband, you know, who fucking knows? Like, whenever people send me stories, they're always like, well, what do you think about the husband? I'm like, the husband didn't write this, the wife did. Why would I take her perspective of her husband and consider that his truth? You know, like
Mm-hmm.
he could be the worst, he could be the best. It does not matter. What matters is you took the time out to write this entire story because you wanted to feel heard. You wanted someone to come in, read this. You wanted to get it off of your chest, and you needed someone to come in and say, what the fuck do I do next? Because I don't know how to navigate this place in life.
And it's one of those things where she says, oh, I'm suffering in silence. How are you going to figure it out if you're just suffering in silence? Even putting it out on a board, you know, the people that take the time to go and comment on this type of material half the time, the comments on this one were pretty sound. They were like, it sounds to me, it's time for you to leave that marriage and for you to do some soul searching. And I was like, okay, the comments that came to like this one were pretty good. But how often are you just met with just atrocious
Absolute
comments?
vitriol. I mean, I'm met with it every day now, but like back then, had I gone to a message board and posted something like that without, I think, the level of awareness that I have today, it probably would have led me to a place of intense self harm. Because I do think that when you are that deep in sorrow and suffering, the only way out is asking for help. And if you don't have anybody to ask for help from, then you need to go find that person. You need to build that relationship with that person. I definitely come from a more opportunistic mindset. This is a problem to be solved, not a problem to complain about. And usually the problem isn't you yourself, it's your lack of understanding of yourself. And so I just really hate the amount of self-loathing that is inside of her story. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
like she had quite some lofty ideas about life and love and marriage and relationships. I would love to spend some time with that chick.
Yeah. Well, and she says that she grew up with a Catholic background. So I think some of the things that we are pointing out are just things that kind of like sex not being important. I think that that was a message that I felt was promoted with my upbringing within
Sex
religion.
was off limits in my upbringing. Sex was completely off limits. Sex was demonized and sex was dangerous.
It was never promoted as enjoyable or
Oh,
something to
no,
look
not at
forward
all.
to,
No, 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 no.
something to
Nope.
guard, and then something to
Yeah.
give. Something to guard, something to give. That was how I always felt it was being.
Something to perform for somebody else, which, like, the amount of calls that I get onto with wives who are actively having sex with their husbands and they do these little mind tricks on themselves where they will stare at the ceiling the entire time. They will pretend that they're with somebody else. They basically try to create an experience that they're not having so that they can actually show up and meet this other person's needs. I'm like, could you imagine if they were doing the same thing? And they're like, oh, I would hate that. And I'm like, yeah, dude, like you're doing it to yourself. Like, let's really critically think this one through. We do not need to be having sex with people just to have sex with people. Like, if you're not enjoying sex, then you probably don't need to be having sex with that person.
Yeah, you would think that that would be the go-to response, but it is not. And there's this idea that marriage seems to like mean that you have to. That just seems really imprinted on a lot of women.
It becomes a part of the checklist.
It's like a part of the duty, like, the
Mhm.
provider, and then this is your role as well.
It really does make me wonder if marriage makes relationships last longer than they should. Like, basically, the expectations of marriage prolong the relationship uh, in its unhealthy status
Yeah.
because you're already in it.
Yeah, and confrontation is hard. And then you go and you've got this legal system to go through, you've accumulated and you've mixed things and households and kids and pets. And the idea of then
Mhm.
confronting it over just staring at the ceiling and dissociating for 30 minutes and then going to watch Bridgerton, like,
Oh, God.
we would be so much better off if we renewed marriage licenses like we did cars, like car warranties or,
Oh my God. And then it would like default to divorce. That actually sounds like a hell of an idea. If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer. Maybe that's what we need to be
I am
chasing.
fine with the institution of marriage, but can we modernize it? We got Tinders sitting one click away, and you've got husbands and wives, and you've got your people within your relationships that aren't interested in dealing with this because they got you forever. We'll deal with it when the kids are grown. It's too stressful right now. Meet me again in 5 years and we'll talk about it. Just meet up for a weekly and get it over with. That seems to just be like this mentality that is far too prominent.
Yeah, the marriage definitely doesn't take priority in our culture.
No.
It's so weird though, because it doesn't take priority within the households that have a marriage. But it is also, I think, the cornerstone of how people build their identities. Like, who am I? I am a mother. I am a wife. I am, and I'm like, man, what if we started like introducing ourselves before we introduced all the roles we play to other people? Like, really developing a sense of self.
Yeah. especially when you get married young. When were you going to be doing that?
Ugh. I actually want to do some interesting statistical analysis since like stats seem to be such a thing that people pine for. But it's like what percentage of people choose to marry before their frontal lobe is developed?
I did.
Same. So 100% in this little room right here.
100% in this little room.
Ah,
Something else that I'll say is I loved how this person was so honest about how every step of the way they knew it was wrong and that they knew they were
uh-huh.
heading down like it was a slippery slope, and yet they couldn't stop themselves. I think that is
Yeah.
such a trend that we see.
I think
Like,
it really is like, if you think about it, right? It is an act of self preservation. When you are doing something and you know better than to do it, it really is almost like your subconscious kicking into gear and being like, hey, you were meant to be alive. You were meant to be alive. Fuck the rules. Let's go. Let's go feel alive really quick because I don't like feeling like this anymore.
because I'm a body and I want to feel alive. Your
Yeah.
brain might not want you to, but like I want to feel good.
Yeah, I remember like closing the door on like a hotel room in China whenever I had like sealed the deal and walking out and being like, oh, fuck. There is no such thing as a goddamn time machine. And I've never wanted one until this moment right now. Like, how do I change the past or how do I rewrite this thing to be accurate to me? And just this immediate, mental move into how do I get myself out of this? How do I pretend this didn't happen? Um, all of that. It was just icky. It was so icky.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? You and I were talking earlier and I loved it. You said that you were opening up to some more people in your personal community. And I was like, God, doesn't it feel good not to be living in secret anymore?
Yeah, that is definitely a thing. Like a whole weight lifts. There's this freedom to it.
Like you're not hiding. And I think that that was probably the most difficult part for me was feeling like I had to hide myself, hide everything about me from everyone, and especially the people that I considered closest to me at that point in time. Like, I didn't want them to know the depths of me. I didn't trust them to know the depths of me. I think it's really interesting whenever we go to make a decision that affects somebody else and we exclude them on purpose, it's because we don't want their influence on the decision. Like, I did this a couple of years ago, or maybe just a year ago with Stan, where I sent an email and I didn't tell him I was sending the email. And then I told him after. And he was like, why the fuck wouldn't you tell me before you sent it? And I was like, because I knew and I didn't want to know. So I just did it anyways. I did not want your influence on this particular decision. And it was me expressing myself to so and so. But yeah, I think that when you are actively working to exclude somebody from a decision, it doesn't make it good, doesn't make it bad. It is that you don't want their influence on the
Mhm.
decision that you're about to make. And what?
I
Say
would
it.
say that is what makes divorce conversation so difficult. Right there. Like that is what makes it this impossible thing to jump over, because if you're engaging it because it's what you want, you know that the response is going to be, let's think of a
Fucking
thousand
no.
different ways to avoid it. And you're like, I've already thought about 1,000 ways to avoid it, and I still want to have the conversation. And it's
Yeah.
such a hard conversation to initiate. There's no more challenging conversation than one that you know the person is not going to want to hear or
They're
engage
not going to
with.
receive it well. They're not going to
Yeah.
receive it well. And I think that, people are like, oh, people who cheat are so inconsiderate. I'm like, I think it's actually the opposite. It's that they have considered everyone but themselves. And it puts them in this place where they think that their wants, their needs are bottom priority uh, in their own heads. They're like, oh, why should I want to feel sex? Why should I want to feel good during sex? That seems like a very superficial need or want. No, sorry. It's the whole entire thing. It all comes together. Whenever, this particular writer in the story had said, I had so many feelings going through my head, I'm like, feelings don't go through your fucking head. Thoughts go through your head. And like feelings kind of come all throughout your body. If you allow yourself to feel it, your feelings will come all throughout your body. You will feel it. If you're really open to allowing yourself to acquaint yourself with your emotional state, you can feel it. It's not I thought about it and my head felt it. It's like my entire self felt it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, though, we learn really easy how not to feel.
I mean, we're definitely programmed that way.
Yeah, I mentioned to you once, I don't know if it was on the podcast, but it was this thing that really sat with me about therapy and how it's not, you don't just go to therapy to heal from trauma. You go to therapy to learn how to feel joy, to learn how to feel all of the good things that come after you finally feel your way through all of the negatives. And then it's time to reconnect in a positive way to like good feelings. And it had never occurred to me. I'm just getting to that side of trauma therapy of being like, oh my gosh, that resonates. It
Mm-hmm.
is really hard to feel like a lot of love and a lot of joy. And because
Mm-hmm.
my actual nervous system is overwhelmed by it because I chose to live in a state of gray. And now there's all these colors. And even though it feels really good, it's like scary to my system
Yeah.
that when's the shoe going to drop? What's going to happen next? What's going to,
Oh, that
like
makes
that
so much sense. Yeah.
fight or flight
Constant
just
anxiety.
kicks in still. And so I feel like now that's what half of my therapy is it's just like, I'm kind of enjoying this. I like not living in chaos. Can you help me stay present when I'm not in chaos? Because I don't want to go and live in chaos again. But my system is freaking out that I'm actually taking control of things and I'm actually making big changes.
Yeah. It's you're expanding your zone of comfort, I think. I think that as you do things differently, you start to demonstrate to yourself that you're capable of doing things differently. And when you do things differently, you feel differently. And so as you expand your comfort zone, it's kind of like, oh, like I'm free to exist. I'm totally here and I am ready to feel it. But also on that comment that you made about divorce and it being a really challenging conversation, I remember doing this call to action on TikTok where I was like, I think I figured it out. The reason why unhappily married people don't get divorced is because they can't agree on anything. And so they just stay stuck until one of the individuals gets, an immense amount of courage to stand in their own truth and say, well, this may not be what's best for you, but I know that this is what's best for me. And I need to drive this decision forward, regardless of how you may feel about it. And I trust you to navigate all of this complexity without me. Like, I think that's what it really does come down to is being able to trust that that person can lead their own life well.
What you're speaking on there, that sounds to me exactly what I think of as codependency is
Mm-hmm.
like that ability to pick, and they're going to be okay too. I think I've personally just felt like for a while, I think I'm ready. But that codependency element of the relationship when you've been with somebody for 12 years is you just don't want to inflict that harm and put it out to the universe that they have to take care of themselves in it. That just need to step in and do that thing is so strong.
Yeah. And also, it's like you say inflict harm. But one of the things that I think that I have done in order to improve my decision making is it being very clear about what it is I am doing without all the storytelling that my brain wants to do on its own. Like, is it getting a divorce inflicting harm? I don't think so. I think that getting a divorce is getting a divorce, and somebody else's reaction to that and how they respond to it is totally up to them. But even, having the narrative inside of your head that if I were to divorce, I would be inflicting harm on somebody else. It deprioritizes you again. And it stands in the way of you making the best decision for yourself. Because again, you're like concerned with the external perception of a decision that you want to make.
Yeah. Well, and the kicker is I've already divulged
I know.
infidelity. So
I
I've already done
know.
harm. Like I've already done harm. And yet there's this part of me that's like, I can't inflict even more harm.
Mm.
Like I've already, yeah, it's
Which
just
really just
funny.
comes down to your core belief. I think that it's a it's a tricky thing to really get into the inner workings of yourself. And if you believe that you are the cause of somebody else's harm, then you're going to go through life with that subtle narrative in the back of your head that's like, oh, don't do that because it's going to hurt other people. And it's like the decision making process kind of needs to consider other people without making you responsible for them,
Mm. Yeah,
you
definitely.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I really don't think that divorce itself is harmful. I think it's the adult's reactions to divorce that can be harmful. So the name calling, the violence, like all of that, that is ultimately harmful. Divorce is just paperwork.
Yeah, that's definitely not untrue.
It's an experience. It is an experience that you
Mm-hmm.
do not have a crystal ball into for sure. But I feel like whenever we go into these like doomsday approaches towards decisions that we know we want to make, we're holding ourselves back from making a decision that's in our best interest just because we're considering all of the negative outcomes instead of having a more opportunist approach, I think, where it's like, well, I've been sitting on this decision for a while and I think I'm ready to make it. I probably need some help in figuring out the ways that I communicate this. I definitely think that expanding your vocabulary is helpful when you're trying to articulate really difficult situations and decisions that you want to make. But yeah, becoming perceptive, you know, and knowing what is true and what is something you made up inside of your head. Like even in that chick story, like I'll never forget Stan talking to one of the girls inside the community. She had said something about her AP, how her AP was feeling over something she did. And Stan goes, why did she make up that story? And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, she spoke for him and how he was feeling, but he never communicated that to her. It was just what she perceived. And I was like, you son of a bitch. You outsmarted me. And it was good. It's so good to be aware of, the factual evidence and all of the inferred meaning that you tend to derive from that evidence. Like, people jump to conclusions like they're, trying to like what's a jumping sport that people do? Clear fucking
The
pole
long jump.
vaulting. Yeah, the long jump. They go, "Oh, he cheated on me, that must mean." And it's like, "No.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. Do not assign meaning. Do not infer any
Especially
intention."
that must mean about me.
Mhm.
The amount of
When
times
you
the
personalize somebody else's personal choices, you are paving your way to hell. You're
mm,
absolutely paving your way to hell. Because even she, in that story, she had said, and then he didn't call me for 4 days. Is it because I was married? And I'm like, girlfriend, that, no, 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 that's not it. His personal decisions are about him. Maybe he got exactly what he wanted and then he was done. And no response is a response. I saw something the other day about some lady who was crying on the internet, being like, some guy got my number. And then we chatted for 2 days. And then I didn't hear back from him. So I showed up at his workplace and he looked me dead in the eye and said hi. But he didn't say anything about not responding to my text messages. And I'm like, son of a bitch. If somebody showed up at my workplace after I was dodging their text messages, I'd be scared. I would be scared of that person. Like,
yep. Yeah, one other thing that I liked that she said that we've actually been talking a little bit about on Insiders is that because sometimes there's long term affairs, but the way that she says it was short lived, but it really affected me. I think that when we try to pretend that an affair meant nothing or that an affair was a mistake, you're just missing this whole growth opportunity. So she knows that it really affected her. I hope that she actually sat with that and figured out the whys to that because it doesn't matter how long or how short it is, the event's
But like
gonna affect
honestly,
you.
like yeah, it's gonna affect you because you're not giving yourself the attention that you desire, right? Like she even said in her story that there were voids and he filled that void. And I'm like, nobody can fill a void within you. That's just a fucking band-aid. Like nobody else has that responsibility. Nobody else has that capability. You actually have to work to understand. And that is the hard work. And when she talks about like how this particular thing really affected me, I think that she is honestly shifting a lot of her unwellness to the experience of the affair. But the affair was just a symptom of everything else that was going on in her life. Like, we want to look at this one thing that we did by society's standards is so bad and so wrong. And therefore, that's why we become affected. But I'm sorry, prior to the affair, you were starving. You were starving for attention. You were starving to have your needs met. You didn't have a sense of community. You didn't have a well connected relationship with your primary partner. So, no, it wasn't the affair that affected you. It's actually your lack of understanding of yourself that is affecting you, and it will continue to affect you until you get to that place where you're willing to do the deep dive in understanding why you feel the way that you feel. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I think that's the cure to those really depressive states that, humans kind of naturally fall into. And if you're working with the wrong tools or you're using the tools improperly, then you're kind of just digging yourself even further into that space.
Yeah. And if you don't actually confront it, you're missing an opportunity to like learn
Mhm.
from it. And you're going to keep going back to it, whether it's by cheating again or whether it's by just literally never getting off of your mind because you never like connected that. You have to actually think about it enough to be like, what did I learn from that thing that happened? And I think all too often we get hung up on the person that was
Mhm.
involved with us, and it's like, no, really, the big question is, uh, did you run away from that relationship and like run away from those parts of yourself
Mhm.
that should actually be looked at?
And also, like, she points to him or the relationship with him, like that was the source of the pain. And I have these really wild thoughts about pain and how we're kind of all born into this world with a guaranteed proportion of pain that we need to kind of go through and parse through. And I think it's much easier to point to somebody else and say, "Oh, you're the reason that I feel poorly." That's totally the easy way to do it. But really getting into it and being like, "Oh, actually, my pain predates you." Like that pain has always been present. And whether I'm actually going into it or not is a conscious decision that I am making because I don't know what my options are. I've never seen anybody do it. I don't know how to do it on my own. Then you really do get to sit with yourself and acquaint yourself with your actual identity and your character, not fucking, oh, I'm so out of character for me. When women say this to me, I'm like, you are not a character. You are not a fixed, place and time or anything like that. Like everything is constantly evolving. Like, don't think that you need to fit yourself into some type of mold that makes you look prettier to the outside world. Like, let's figure out what you actually feel and what you actually want and what you think. And let's
Mm-hmm.
lay it all out and let's redirect your focus back to you because right now it's on Tinder, it's on your phone, it's on your husband, it's on the way that your family perceives your husband. What else was her attention on? How bad she was for enjoying attention. Like all of the things that her attention is concentrated in are not of growth, they're of stagnation.
And none of them were of communicating better with the spouse. It was all, but I think that this is something that we see all the time. When you actually
Mhm.
start digging around the internet and actually looking for these stories, anyways, there's so many that have this kind of through line of like,
Mhm.
you were starving and you found support elsewhere.
So, just to close this up, Anne Marie, what do you think was I'll say, the lesson that was inside of this woman's story? What do you think her like main lesson that the universe served her was? I always ask my kids this. I go, "Hey, did you learn something?" Like the fucking milk spills, and I'm like, "Did you learn something yet?"
Maybe for this person, the big lesson was that there is more out there. You know,
Oh yeah.
there's pleasure to be found and joy to be found and excitement to be found. She doesn't seem quite ready to receive it yet.
No, no, not at all. She thinks she needs to be put in prison. I know her. I was her.
Yeah. I was her. I was her. She hasn't figured it out. She doesn't seem to quite have received it fully yet, but I think that the experience alone has at least taught her
Yeah.
less about feeling things in her head and more about feeling things.
Yeah, absolutely. God, I hope that this makes its way to her and she wants to have a 15-minute conversation because, man, she got a lot served to her in that one. I think that even whenever you're just a young girl and you're moving entire countries, like that is a load within itself. You're exposed to a culture that isn't your own. You're exposed to surroundings that likely don't operate the way that they did where you're from. That's There's a lot of learning curves that are coming her way, and whether she wants to, surf them or not is totally up to her.
I feel like if she chooses not to, it sounds like this might be something that'll recur
It's going
and
to be a
keep bumping into
reoccurring
her.
fucking lesson, man. I swear, the reoccurring lessons I get in life. What was the one recently? Oh, sunblock. Forgot sunblock in Mexico when I went with the girls for that retreat. And what was the other one? Oh, to put it on before I actually go out in the sun. Novel
Oh yeah.
idea.
Having a thing and using the tool are two different things.
There's this one tagline that goes around and it's called Be Do Have. And it's like, if I want to be without a sunburn, then I need to be doing the application of the sunscreen and I need to have the sunscreen. And like, it's also, I feel like that those three words do a lot. If I want to be an entrepreneur, I need to be doing the things that make me an entrepreneur. And I need to have the team in place for me to put myself into that role.
And look at you doing all the things.
Oh, fucking doing it, man. Really embracing all the shit that I keep spewing on the internet because I definitely don't want to be someone who's walking in misalignment. Not with this piece. Maybe if I was alone. No, just kidding. Well, I think that's it for today's episode. We hope that you guys really enjoyed this little new take, and we're looking forward to delivering more content like this in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.